The development context of Villages and Dungeons gives me a strong indie that chose a brutal focus vibe. Instead of trying to compete with AAA production, it concentrates its energy on replayability, systems, and content volume, which you can really feel while playing. First, it's clear the project was born with a very sharp idea of a roguelite card game with auto battle, and was polished around that, being unapologetically leaner and more direct than the genre average. The game's own public description leans into this deck building plus roguelite plus run unpredictability angle, so everything feels built to serve that backbone. Another thing that stands out as a player is how the game prioritizes mechanical breadth, cards, combinations, run variation, over narrative or cinematic presentation. This is very typical of lean indie productions. Instead of hiding limitations, the game tries to win you over through the decision layer and that just one more run feeling. This design choice is consistent with its positioning as a more hardcore card battler roguelite. The development felt very iterative to me, the kind that relies on community feedback and continuous adjustments. As someone who played it, the impression is that Villages and Dungeons was developed with a very honest philosophy: cut the fat, get the player into the loop quickly, and let the addiction come from the strategic layer and variation. It feels like a small studio betting everything on systemic design and post-launch support, updates, community, iteration, rather than window dressing polish. The story in Villages and Dungeons isn't the kind of narrative that tries to hold your hand with cutscenes and long dialogues. It functions more as a dark backdrop to justify the cycle of exploration and survival. The game sells itself much more as a strategy/deck-building roguelite with random dungeons, events, and diverse enemies than as a traditional narrative campaign, and that defines what to expect and what not to expect from the plot. As a player, the feeling is that the story here lies more in the world's atmosphere than in a script with a beginning, middle, and end. You head in, face the unknown, reap the consequences, and piece together meaning from what happens during your run. These events and encounters end up becoming micro-stories because you start remembering that one run where I was strong and a specific encounter messed everything up. That's emergent narrative, not linear narrative. What struck me most is that the game treats dungeon crawling as something truly desperate. It's not a glamorous, heroic adventure. It's survival, calculation, and risk. Instead of striking characters, the protagonist becomes your build, the creature you chose and the cards you slotted. So the dramatic arc is what I managed to build versus what the dungeon demanded of me. There's also a world and village component, as the title suggests, that for me acts as an emotional anchor. It gives the idea that the dungeon isn't just a combat board, it's a threat/reality orbiting a community. Even when the game doesn't dump lore via text, the village versus dungeon contrast creates a context that's easy to feel. There's something to protect/strengthen and a hostile place that always pulls you back. At the same time, the story is very economical, which might frustrate those expecting Slay the Spire with a soap opera on top. It clearly prefers letting you play over explaining the world, making the plot more of a suggestion than a statement. You fill in the gaps with your imagination, and the game moves on without asking permission. The game's story won me over more as a sensation than a plot. It's the kind of game where you remember the situations, the unfair twists, and the unlikely victories, and that becomes your version of the tale. If you expect heavy lore and memorable characters, it will feel shallow. If you expect a world that fuels the roguelite loop, it delivers exactly what it promises. The gameplay is, for me, the kind of design that looks simple in the menu, but turns into a hectic puzzle once you understand the gears. It's a hardcore card roguelite where deck building is the core, featuring random dungeons, events, and varied enemies. The nucleus is straightforward: explore, choose paths, adjust the deck, and survive. But the mastery curve comes from how fast you learn to read threats and build synergy. The first point that defines the experience is this mix of deck builder and auto battle. You aren't piloting turn by turn like a traditional card game, so the pleasure comes more from planning than reacting. What caught my attention while playing was realizing that the game demands responsibility for your choices. If your build is wrong, you can't skill your way out manually. You watch your strategy crumble and learn the hard way. The best part of combat is the feeling that each run pushes you toward a different plan because the game is built on randomness and a large card pool. The public description emphasizes a vast array of cards and unpredictability, which fits that urge to experiment with builds just to see how far they go before hitting an elite that humbles you. The roguelite side shines when you enter the exploration flow, picking a route, accepting an event, measuring risk, and moving on. On good runs, there's that delicious feeling of, I've figured the game out, until an encounter reminds you that it's hardcore, and that consistency matters more than a power spike. Now, being honest, the experience also has that typical indie roughness. At times, readability and onboarding feel like they leave you a bit on your own. This isn't necessarily bad. Some people love discovering everything themselves, but it's exactly what made my first few hours feel more like studying than a power fantasy, though once it clicks, it becomes addictive. I also like how the game sells challenge as an identity. It's not just a cute deck builder with dungeons, it's a game that describes itself as core strategy plus exploration and challenge, and it acts accordingly. When you start treating every combat as a proof of concept for your deck, rather than a random fight, the gameplay becomes much more interesting. In the end, Villages and Dungeons feels made for those who enjoy optimizing and taking hits. Fast runs, frequent decisions, and a loop that rewards real learning. The graphics are clearly indie by design. They don't strive for realism or spectacle, but rather a functional identity to sustain the loop of runs and decisions. For me, this works because the game wants your eyes to go straight to what matters: cards, stats, effects, rather than visual fluff. What I enjoyed most visually was the coherence between the interface and card art. Most of the game's personality lives there. So when you're theory crafting a build, the visuals help flavor the system. Now, the less glamorous side. The map, dungeon visuals, and some presentation elements give off a built-to-run and iterate vibe, rather than built to be admired. As a player, I felt the game is more beautiful when you're reading the board, icons, effects, numbers, than when you stop to contemplate the scenery. There's also a side effect typical of small projects. Some details feel temporary or like premium placeholders. Not ugly, but with that look that suggests the dev prioritized content volume and balance over total visual consistency. This aligns with the overall impression of a strategic roguelite focused on card variety and random dungeons, where visuals need to be clear and fast. Personally, I accepted the graphics as part of the systems game package. The more I was into the runs, the less I cared about visual simplicity because my brain was in strategy mode. But when I went back to the menu and compared it to more luxurious deck builders, I could feel that the art direction here is more utilitarian than iconic. Overall, I'd say Villages and Dungeons is pretty enough not to get in the way, and at times, especially the cards, it even has charm. But it's not the kind of game you recommend for the graphics. It seems designed to serve clarity and gameplay rhythm. If you buy into that, the visuals fit like a glove. The performance surprised me with its overall lightness. As someone who played dozens of runs, I feel it runs smoothly most of the time, especially since it focuses on card UI and auto-battler combat without demanding heavy graphics. I didn't need to tweak settings to get a constant 60 FPS on my mid-range setup, which is perfect for long roguelite sessions. What I noticed most is that the rare stutters come from transitions between events or loading new dungeons, not sudden frame drops. This happens maybe once every 5 to 10 runs and disappears quickly. It's easy to ignore if you're immersed in deck building, but it can be annoying when you pause to analyze a build. Being a game made in the Godot engine, the performance inherits that typical efficiency for 2D projects, even after hours of grinding unlocks. I loved this for testing builds without my PC turning into a toaster, something more ambitious indies don't always achieve. In post-launch updates, it has a good track record of patches. It seems the dev focused on stability, as recent runs feel cleaner than my launch day ones. As a loyal player, this gave me the confidence to invest time, knowing performance bugs are being ironed out. One personal note, in intense combats with many cards and effects on screen, there's an occasional micro-stutter that breaks the mental rhythm. It's not game-breaking, but in a roguelite where you read synergies in seconds, any delay stands out. Still, it's better than many deck builders that hog RAM mercilessly. The listed minimum requirements are very humble, 4 GB of RAM and integrated graphics, and in practice, it delivers. I ran it on an old laptop with no problems, just with VSync on to avoid tearing. This reinforces the accessible indie vibe, where performance isn't a barrier to experiencing the core loop. Overall, Villages and Dungeons has solid performance for what it promises. Stable for marathons, light for casual hardware, with minimal rough edges that the dev seems willing to sand down. Buying Villages and Dungeons is definitely worth it if you're a fan of roguelike deck builders, especially if you enjoy experimenting with crazy builds and taking calculated risks. The game delivers an exploration and combat loop that hooks you. Every run brings a new surprise and that just one more urge, even after several hours. The player who will enjoy this most is the one drawn to strategies that are easy to learn but hard to master. The 1+4 card system, 1 main plus 4 support, makes deck construction fast and creative, but requires attention to maximize synergies. The game is perfect for those seeking gameplay-focused experiences rather than narrative or high-impact art. It's economical, direct, and delivers replayability without fluff. Great for those with little time or who enjoy quick sessions with high strategic depth. The performance, as mentioned, is very solid. It runs light on almost any PC. This is a huge plus for those who prefer enjoying the game without technical worries. If you're wondering if it's worth it, it's currently 25% off until January 6th, 2026. The value for money is excellent for an indie with this much content and replay potential. The community around the game has already grown, with many people sharing builds and tips, which reinforces the feeling that the game has a long life ahead. Ultimately, for those who love cards and games that encourage you to try, fail, and learn, Villages and Dungeons is an excellent investment. It delivers exactly what it promises: pure fun, infinite replayability, and a deck building system that invites creativity. I bought it at full price and don't regret it, but I'd recommend it now on sale to maximize value. It provides an honest addiction without the frills, and the discount gives you plenty of time to dive in. As a player who cleared insane runs, it's on my list of underrated indies that deserve the hype. If you love Slay the Spire or Balatro for the strategic layer, you'll find that same energy here, but with more emphasis on the unpredictability of events and creatures.